The auction block stood weathered and worn in the center of Maybrook's dusty main street, its wooden planks stained by years of desperate transactions and broken dreams. Sarah clutched the worn carpet bag containing everything she owned in this new life, a few patched dresses, a small Bible, and the carefully forged papers that declared her Sarah Moore, seamstress, seeking indentured servitude, rather than Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton, daughter of railroad magnate Harrison Pemberton. The late April sun beat down mercilessly as she stood among the other women waiting to be bought at auction for domestic servitude. Her hands, once soft and pampered, now bore the calluses she would earn during 3 months of hard labor in Denver, preparing for this deception. She would darken her golden hair with walnut dye and let the frontier sun weather her pale complexion until she looked like any other working woman seeking refuge in the small Wyoming town. Next, called out Ezra Thompson, the town's self-appointed auctioneer, a man whose gut strained against his vest and whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who profited from others' desperation. Sarah Moore, seamstress and general household help. Sarah stepped forward, keeping her eyes downcast as she would practiced. Behind Thompson stood several potential masters, ranchers needing help with spring cleaning, shopkeepers requiring assistance, and one man who made her stomach turn with recognition, Marcus Whitfield, her father's business associate, and the very man from whose marriage proposal she would fled 3 states away. He stood in the shadows of Peterson's general store, scanning the women with predatory interest, clearly still searching for Harrison Pemberton's missing daughter. "I can sew, cook, and tend children," Sarah said quietly, using the accent she would learn from her childhood nanny, a woman from the Missouri hills, whose gentle drawl now served as perfect camouflage. "I is not afraid of hard work." A tall man stepped forward from the small crowd. Joshua Kane moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to danger, his dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples, his blue eyes holding depths that spoke of loss, weathered with time. He wore working clothes, sturdy boots, canvas pants, a shirt that had seen honest labor, but carried himself with quiet authority. "I am looking for someone to help with my boy and keep house," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man who chose his words carefully. "The work's hard and the pay is not much, but there is a roof and 3 meals. Sarah met his eyes briefly, noting the kindness there despite the caution. "I would be grateful for the work, sir." "Joshua Kane," he said, extending a work-roughened hand. "And you be living out at the Triple K about 5 miles north. It is isolated, especially come winter. That suits me fine, Mr. Kane." She shook his hand, grateful for the firm, honest grip that held no lingering or improper pressure. Ezra Thompson interjected with practiced authority. "Now hold on there, Kane. Miss Moore here has got other prospects. Mr. Whitfield's been asking particular questions about household help." Thompson's voice carried the oily persuasion of a man accustomed to manipulating desperate people for his own profit. Sarah's heart hammered as Marcus Whitfield stepped from the shadows, his pale eyes scanning her face with growing recognition. She forced herself to remain calm, to breathe steadily, to become the woman she would, created rather than the frightened girl who had fled her father's mansion in the dead of night. "Indeed," Whitfield said smoothly, his Eastern accent cutting through the frontier atmosphere like a blade. "I represent certain business interests that require particular kinds of domestic help. Women with refined backgrounds who might have fallen on hard times." Joshua Kane's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Moore's already accepted my offer." "Now, that is not quite how it works," Thompson protested, clearly hoping to profit from a bidding war. "The lady's got options, and Mr. Whitfield here is offering premium wages." Sarah stepped closer to Joshua, making her choice clear through action rather than words. "I said yes to Mr. Kane's offer. My word stands." Whitfield's eyes narrowed, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "You look familiar, miss. Have we met? Perhaps in Denver? Or further east?" "I doubt that, sir," Sarah replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "I's not been much of anywhere except Missouri and here." Joshua placed a protective hand on her elbow, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. "Come on, Miss Moore. Let me show you the wagon. We will get your things and head home." As they walked away from the auction block, Sarah caught fragments of heated conversation between Thompson and Whitfield. The railroad man was clearly frustrated, his search for Harrison Pemberton's missing daughter hitting another dead end in a territory full of women seeking new starts and fresh beginnings. Joshua's wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, hitched to two strong horses that stamped impatiently in the afternoon heat. A boy of perhaps 8 years sat in the back, his dark hair matching his father's, his serious blue eyes taking in everything around him with careful attention. "This here's my son, Daniel," Joshua said, as he helped Sarah up onto the wagon seat. "Daniel, this is Miss Moore. She's going to help keep house and look after things." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." "The pleasure's mine, Daniel." Sarah turned to face the boy, noting the weariness in his young features, the way he seemed to study adults for signs of threat or kindness. "I hope we will be friends." As Joshua guided the wagon through Maybrook's dusty streets, Sarah observed the town with eyes trained by 3 months of frontier life. The buildings were mostly wooden, practical structures, built to withstand harsh weather and harder times. Peterson's General Store anchored one end of Main Street, while the Maybrook Saloon and the small church bracketed the other end, representing the eternal struggle between salvation and sin that characterized every frontier settlement. Women in practical dresses and sunbonnets conducted their business with efficient purpose, while men in working clothes discussed crops, cattle, and the railroad's plans to extend the line through their valley. Children played in the dusty spaces between buildings, their games interrupted by the occasional passage of loaded wagons or riders on urgent business. "Town's growing," Joshua observed, as they passed the construction site for a new bank building. "Railroads bring in changes, some good, some less so." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Railroad money meant prosperity for some, but it also brought outside interests, land speculation, and the kind of corruption that thrived where large sums of money changed hands quickly. Men like Marcus Whitfield followed the railroad expansion, seeking opportunities to exploit both the land and the people who worked it. The Triple K Ranch spread across a beautiful valley 5 miles north of town, protected by rolling hills on 3 sides and opening toward a creek that meandered through cottonwood groves. The main house was solid and well-built, constructed of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that faced the mountain vista. Outbuildings included a barn, chicken coop, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop where Joshua crafted furniture and repaired equipment. "It is beautiful," Sarah said softly, genuinely moved by the peaceful setting. "My wife picked this spot," Joshua replied, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "Said she wanted somewhere Daniel could grow up safe, where he could see the mountains every morning and know there was something bigger than himself in the world." Daniel climbed down from the wagon with practiced ease and immediately began unhitching the horses with the competence of a child raised to useful work. Sarah noticed the smooth coordination between father and son, the way they worked together without needing many words, the clear affection that underlay their practical partnership. "How long has it been just the two of you?" Sarah asked gently. 3 years come fall," Joshua answered, lifting her carpet bag from the wagon bed. "Fever took Rebecca when Daniel was 5. Been managing on our own since, but a boy needs, well, he needs more than just his father's rough ways." But the house's interior reflected the careful touch of a woman who would love her home, combined with the practical adjustments of a man raising a child alone. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor, with a stone fireplace that would provide both heat and cooking capability during harsh winter months. Handmade furniture showed Joshua's craftsmanship, while small details, carefully tended plants, handmade quilts, children's drawings tacked to the walls, spoke of a home where love still lived despite loss. "Daniel sleeps in the loft," Joshua explained, gesturing toward a ladder that led to the upper level. "There is a small room off the kitchen that would be yours, if that is suitable." Sarah examined a tidy space that would become her sanctuary. It contained a narrow bed, a small table that could serve as a desk, and pegs for hanging clothes. A single window looked out toward the mountains, offering both light and beauty. After months of sleeping in boarding houses and shared rooms, the privacy felt like luxury. "It is perfect," she said sincerely. That first evening, as Sarah prepared supper from supplies Joshua had stocked, she observed the rhythms of their established household. Daniel completed his chores without being asked, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, bringing in firewood for the morning. Joshua tended to the horses and cattle, repaired a broken fence rail, and spent time in his workshop crafting what appeared to be a chair. "Miss Moore," Daniel said as she stirred a pot of beans seasoned with salt pork, "do you know letters?" "I do," Sarah replied carefully. "Do you?" "Some. Pa taught me from Ma's Bible and the almanac." But there is not many books. Sarah's heart ached for the intelligent child whose hunger for learning was so obvious. "Well, perhaps we can work on that. I brought a few books with me." Joshua entered the kitchen as she spoke, his expression suddenly cautious. "That is kind of you, Miss Moore, but Daniel gets plenty of learning from practical work. Do not need him getting ideas above his station." The words stung because Sarah heard the pain behind them, a father's fear that education might take his son away, that books and learning represented a world that had no place for men who worked with their hands and carved lives from raw frontier. She would encountered this attitude before during her months of hiding, the way frontier people sometimes viewed education with suspicion, seeing it as either useless luxury or dangerous temptation. "Reading and writing are tools, same as a hammer or a plow," she said quietly. "They help a man do whatever work he chooses better." Joshua studied her face in the lamplight, perhaps hearing something in her words that suggested education beyond what a poor seamstress might typically possess. Maybe so. We will see. Supper passed in comfortable conversation about practical matters, the coming planting season, repairs needed around the ranch, Daniel's responsibilities as he grew older. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months, surrounded by honest people who asked nothing from her except honest work in return. For Daniel went to bed in his loft. Joshua lingered at the kitchen table while Sarah cleaned the dishes. "Miss Moore, I got to ask, you running from something?" Sarah's hands stilled in the wash basin. She would expected this question, but still felt unprepared for Joshua's direct approach. "What makes you think that?" Woman traveling alone, no family mentioned, accepting the first job offered without asking about wages or conditions. Either you are running from something, or you are not what you appear to be. "Maybe both," Sarah answered honestly, turning to face him. "But I am not running from the law, and I will not bring trouble to your home." Joshua nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We all got reasons for the choices we make. Just know that Daniel's been hurt enough in his short life. I will not stand for anyone bringing more pain to that boy." "Neither would I," Sarah replied, meaning every word. The conversation marked an unspoken agreement between them. He would not pry into her past, and she would prove through actions that his trust was not misplaced. It was the kind of frontier bargain that bound people together without need for written contracts or formal ceremonies. Spring deepened into early summer as Sarah settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered genuine satisfaction in the daily tasks that kept the household running, cooking meals from simple ingredients, tending the vegetable garden, mending clothes and linens, preserving food for the winter months still to come. The work was harder than anything she would ever done in her pampered previous life, but it was also more meaningful, directly connected to survival and comfort. Daniel bloomed under her patient attention. During quiet evening hours, she taught him to read more advanced texts, helped him practice writing, and shared stories that expanded his understanding of the world beyond their valley. Joshua initially watched these lessons with suspicion, but gradually came to appreciate how learning enhanced rather than threatened his son's practical education. "Miss Moore," Daniel said one evening, as they worked through a passage in her well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, "were you a teacher before?" Sarah considered how to answer truthfully without revealing too much. "I had good teachers when I was young. They showed me that learning is a gift we can share with others." "What happened to them?" "Sometimes people have to leave places they love to protect the people they care about," Sarah answered carefully. Daniel nodded with the serious wisdom of a child who would experience loss. "Like when Ma had to leave us to go to heaven." Sarah's heart broke a little at his innocent comparison. "Something like that, yes." Joshua had been listening from his chair by the fireplace, where he worked on carving wooden toys for Daniel's upcoming birthday. Miss Moore's right about learning being a gift, he said quietly. Your ma always said education was something nobody could ever take away from you. The mention of Rebecca Kane opened a door to deeper conversation. Joshua began sharing memories of his wife, painting a picture of a woman who had been educated beyond most frontier standards, but had chosen love and adventure over safe comfort. Sarah recognized the parallels to her own situation, but also understood the crucial difference. Rebecca had chosen freely, while Sarah had fled from forces determined to control her destiny. News from town arrived with supply runs and visits from neighbors, painting a picture of changes that made Sarah increasingly nervous. Marcus Whitfield had purchased land near Maybrook and was building what he claimed would be a cattle operation. However, his activities suggested other interests. He would have been asking questions about women who had arrived in the territory during recent months, offering rewards for information about missing persons, and cultivating relationships with men like Ezra Thompson, who profited from others' vulnerabilities. Man's got too much interest in other people's business, observed Frank Peterson, the storekeeper, during one of Joshua's supply runs. A cattle operation do not require asking questions about every woman between here and Denver. Sarah's anxiety increased when Daniel reported seeing unfamiliar riders surveying their valley from the ridgeline. They was not doing nothing wrong, the boy said, but they was watching our place particular-like. Joshua's expression darkened. How many men? 3. Had good horses and city clothes under their dust coats. That night, Joshua checked to make sure they were able to defend themselves. Might be nothing, he told Sarah, as she helped him inventory their supplies, but a man who will not protect what is his deserves to lose it. The threat crystallized one hot July afternoon, when Marcus Whitfield arrived at the Triple K with 2 hired men, and Ezra Thompson trailing behind like a nervous dog. Sarah saw them coming up the valley road and felt ice form in her stomach despite the summer heat. Daniel, go to the barn and stay there until I call you, she instructed quietly. The boy nodded and slipped away, understanding from her tone that serious adult business was approaching. Joshua emerged from his workshop, moving with the controlled alertness of a man prepared for trouble. He positioned himself between the approaching riders and the house, his hand resting casually near his belt. Afternoon, Kane, Whitfield called as he reined in his horse. Fine spread you have got here. This serves, Joshua replied evenly. What brings you out this way, Whitfield? I'm looking for someone, and I think your domestic help might be able to assist me. Whitfield's pale eyes fixed on Sarah, who had stepped onto the porch despite every instinct telling her to hide. You see, I represent a family back east that is quite concerned about a missing daughter. Young woman, educated, might be traveling under an assumed name. Sarah forced herself to remain calm, to project the simple weariness of a working woman confronted by wealthy strangers. I am sorry to hear about their troubles, sir, but I do not know nothing about missing daughters. No. Whitfield dismounted and approached the porch, his movements predatory despite their surface courtesy. Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton disappeared from her father's house in Chicago 3 months ago. About the same time, Sarah Moore appeared in Denver, and coincidentally, both women share certain physical characteristics. Joshua stepped forward, his body language shifting from cautious to dangerous. Mister, you are on my land making accusations against a woman under my protection. I suggest you choose your next words carefully. One of Whitfield's hired men, a thin fighter with cold eyes, let his hand drift. Easy there, rancher. We are just asking questions. And I am just telling you that you have asked enough. Joshua's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had faced violence before and emerged victorious. Miss Moore's work and character speak for themselves. Whatever business you think you have here is finished. Whitfield smiled without warmth. I am afraid it's not that simple. You see, Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton stands to inherit a substantial fortune upon her marriage to me. Her father is quite anxious for the ceremony to take place. Then maybe she do not want to marry you, Joshua said bluntly. What she wants is irrelevant. Her father has made certain legal arrangements that require her presence in Chicago immediately. Sarah found her voice despite her fear. And if she do not want to go, Whitfield's mask slipped slightly, revealing the cruel calculation beneath his polished exterior. Then her father will be forced to take steps to ensure her cooperation. You see, certain debts and obligations have been arranged in Sarah Elizabeth's name. Failure to honor these commitments would result in legal consequences that extend to anyone harboring or assisting her. The threat was clear. Comply or watch innocent people suffer for her choices. Sarah felt the trap closing around her, understanding that her father and Whitfield had anticipated her flight and prepared accordingly. The wood created legal vulnerabilities that could destroy Joshua and Daniel along with her. That is quite a story, Joshua said calmly. Too bad it do not concern us. Miss Moore here is exactly who she says she is, and she is under my protection. Ezra Thompson spoke up nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but committed to Whitfield's money. Now see here, Kane. Mr. Whitfield's offering a substantial reward for information leading to Miss Pemberton's return. No need for anyone to get unfriendly about this. Is not nothing unfriendly about a man protecting his household, Joshua replied. But if you gentlemen do not have business here, you are welcome to ride back to town. Whitfield remounted his horse, his expression promising future trouble. This is not finished, Kane. Legal papers are being prepared as we speak. When they arrive, you will find that harboring a fugitive carries serious consequences. When legitimate law officers arrive with legitimate papers, we will deal with them accordingly, Joshua answered. Until then, you are trespassing. The visitors departed, but their parting words carried clear implications of escalating trouble. Sarah watched them disappear over the ridge with a heavy heart, knowing that her presence had brought danger to people who had shown her nothing but kindness. I am sorry, she said quietly. I should leave before this gets worse. You was not going anywhere, Joshua replied firmly. Daniel and I talked about this possibility weeks ago. We knew you were running from something, and we made our choice to stand by you. Daniel emerged from the barn, his young face serious with understanding beyond his years. Miss Moore, are you really somebody else? Sarah knelt to face him at eye level, choosing honesty over comfortable lies. My name really is Sarah, and everything I have told you about myself is true. But I did have to leave my old life to stay safe, like when animals change their coats for winter, something like that. Yes, Daniel nodded gravely. Pa says sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect what matters. That evening, as Sarah prepared what might be their last normal supper together, Joshua outlined their situation with military precision. Whitfield's got money and connections, but he is operating outside proper law. That gives us some advantages if you're smart about it. What kind of advantages? Sarah asked. This is still frontier territory. Written law do not always match what is right, and folks here understand the difference. Whitfield's making enemies by throwing his weight around, threatening established families, disrupting community peace. That matters more than Eastern papers and railroad money. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. You think the town would support us? Depends on how we handle things. But Frank Peterson's already asking questions about Whitfield's real business, and Sheriff Moore is not happy about outside interests making threats against his citizens. Daniel looked up from his whittling project. What about the church folks? They do not like people who hurt families. Joshua smiled at his son's astute observation. That is right. Reverend Hayes has been watching Whitfield's activities with considerable concern. Over the following days, Joshua carefully built a network of community support, sharing just enough of Sarah's story to generate sympathy while protecting the details that might compromise her safety. The frontier code of protecting women and children ran deep, particularly when the threat came from wealthy outsiders who show no respect for local customs or values. Frank Peterson proved a valuable ally, using his position as storekeeper to gather information about Whitfield's activities and share it with other concerned citizens. Man's been hiring rough types, reported during one of Joshua's visits, not the kind of men you need for cattle work. Sheriff John Moore, no relation to Sarah's assumed name, listened carefully to Joshua's concerns about outside threats to community peace. I cannot act on suspicions, he said, but I can make sure everyone understands that threats against my citizens will be met with appropriate response. Reverend Hayes addressed the issue indirectly during Sunday services, preaching about the Christian duty to protect the innocent and oppose those who would exploit the vulnerable. His words carried particular weight with the women of the community, who understood implicitly that Sarah's situation represented a threat that could affect any of them. The community's quiet mobilization created unexpected complications for Whitfield's plans. His hired investigators found their questions met with suspicious silence, their movements watched and reported, their attempts at intimidation countered by collective resistance. "Folks are treating me like I got some kind of disease," Ezra Thompson complained to anyone who would listen. "All I'd done was facilitate a legitimate business transaction." The pressure culminated in late August, when Whitfield arrived in Maybrook with a federal marshal and documents claiming to authorize Sarah's return to Chicago. The legal papers appeared impressive, complete with official seals and signatures, but Sheriff Moore examined them with the skeptical eye of a man who had seen his share of fraudulent documents. "These papers do not give you authority in my jurisdiction," he told the federal marshal, "and they sure do not authorize you to remove any woman against her will without a proper hearing." The marshal, a thin man named Carver, who seemed more interested in his fee than in justice, waved the documents impatiently. "Federal warrants supersede local authority, Sheriff. The woman is wanted for questioning regarding financial irregularities. Then she will be questioned here, in my jail, with proper legal representation," Sheriff Moore replied calmly. "That is how we handle things in Maybrook." The standoff moved to the courthouse, a small building that served as the center of official business in the growing town. Word spread quickly, and by the appointed hearing time, the courtroom was packed with citizens who would come to observe the proceedings. Sarah sat between Joshua and Frank Peterson, who would volunteer to serve as her legal advocate, despite having no formal training. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she answered the marshal's questions. "State your name for the record," Marshal Carver demanded. "Sarah Moore," she replied clearly. "Your real name," Whitfield interjected from his position near the front of the courtroom. Sheriff Moore rapped his gavel. "The witness has stated her name. Unless you have evidence to the contrary, that statement stands." Marshal Carver produced a daguerreotype, holding it up for the court to see. "This is Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton, daughter of Harris and Pemberton of Chicago. I submit that she and the defendant are the same person." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as people craned to see the photograph. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the formal portrait taken for her engagement announcement before she would learn to disguise her appearance or alter her bearing. Frank Peterson rose to examine the photograph. "This shows a well-dressed young lady with elaborate hairstyle and fine clothing. I see no resemblance to Miss Moore, a working woman whose appearance reflects her circumstances." The comparison was telling. The woman in the photograph wore silk and jewels, her hair arranged in elaborate curls, her expression reflecting a life of privilege and protection. Sarah, as she sat in the courtroom, wore practical cotton, her hair simply braided, her hands showing the calluses of honest labor. "People change their appearance when they are running from the law," Marshal Carver argued. "What law?" Sheriff Moore asked pointedly. "What crime has Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton allegedly committed?" The question exposed the weakness in Whitfield's case. "Financial irregularities," he repeated vaguely. "Breach of contract, failure to honor family obligations." "None of which constitute federal crimes," Frank Peterson observed, "and none of which authorize removal of a citizen from her home without due process." Reverend Hayes rose from his seat in the gallery. "Your Honor, I have known Miss Moore for months. She has proven herself a woman of good character, devoted to the care of a motherless child, contributing positively to our community. Whatever troubles she may have had in her past, she has built an honest life here." Other community members added their voices. Women who would work alongside Sarah at church functions, men who would observe her dedication to Daniel's welfare, neighbors who would witness her integration into the fabric of their small society. Marshal Carver grew increasingly frustrated as the hearing turned against him. "This is all very touching, but it does not change the legal facts. The woman is wanted for questioning, and I have authority to transport her." "You have authority to ask questions," Sheriff Moore corrected. "But transportation requires evidence of flight to avoid prosecution, and I see no such evidence." Whitfield finally exploded with frustrated rage. "This is ridiculous. That woman is Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton. She is legally contracted to marry me, and her father demands her return." The outburst revealed the true nature of his interest, peeling away the pretense of law enforcement and exposing the personal vendetta beneath. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs as people understood that they were witnessing an attempted forced marriage rather than legitimate legal proceedings. Judge Williams, a practical man who would serve the community for 15 years, rapped his gavel for order. "Mr. Whitfield, this court has no jurisdiction over marriage contracts or family disputes from other states. Miss Moore appears to be a law-abiding citizen of Wyoming territory, and she will remain so unless and until legitimate charges are filed against her." The ruling effectively ended Whitfield's immediate hopes, but his expression promised continued trouble. As the courtroom cleared, he approached Joshua with barely controlled fury. "This is not finished, Kane. You think you can steal another man's property and get away with it?" Joshua's response was quiet but deadly serious. "Miss Moore is not property, and she is under my protection. Any attempt to harm her will be met with appropriate force." The confrontation marked a turning point in the community's perception of the situation. What had begun as a question of identity had become a clear case of outside intimidation threatening local autonomy. The people of Maybrook understood that if wealthy interests could force their will on one citizen, no one was truly safe. That evening, as Sarah helped Daniel with his reading lessons, she struggled with conflicting emotions. The community's support overwhelmed her with gratitude, but guilt plagued her conscience. These good people were risking their safety and prosperity to protect her from consequences of choices they did not fully understand. "Miss Moore," Daniel said, looking up from his book, "are you sad about something?" "I am worried that my problems might cause trouble for people I care about," she answered honestly. "Pa says troubles shared are troubles halved," the boy replied, with innocent wisdom. "And good people do not let bad people hurt their friends." Joshua entered the kitchen as Daniel spoke, his expression reflecting the weight of recent events. "Daniel's right. This community's made its choice. We protect our own, and that includes you. But what if Whitfield brings more legal pressure? What if he threatens the ranch, or your business relationships, or Daniel's future?" Joshua sat down at the table, his weathered hands folding over the worn wood. "Sarah, and I reckon that is your real name. Whatever else might be different. You've been here 4 months now. You helped plant our garden, preserved food for winter, taught my boy things I never could have taught him. You made this house a home again, in ways I did not even realize we would lost." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Rebecca always said that family is not just about blood. It is about people who choose to stand by each other when things get hard. You have proven you are family, and we do not abandon family." The simple declaration carried more weight than any legal document or formal ceremony. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she understood that she would found something she would never truly had, even in her father's mansion: unconditional acceptance from people who valued her for who she was, rather than what she represented. Fall arrived with spectacular color, painting the mountain slopes in shades of gold and crimson that took Sarah's breath away. The harvest from their garden provided abundance beyond what the small family could consume, leading to preservation activities that filled the root cellar and pantry with supplies for the coming winter. Sarah threw herself into the work with determination born of understanding how precious this life had become. She learned to smoke meat, preserve vegetables, can fruit, and store grains with techniques passed down through generations of frontier women. The skills represented far more than mere survival preparation, for badges of belonging, proof of her commitment to the life she would chosen. Daniel thrived under the stability their household had achieved. His reading had progressed to adult texts, his writing showed increasing sophistication, and his understanding of mathematics expanded through practical applications in ranch management. More importantly, the wariness that had characterized his interactions with adults began to fade, replaced by the confident curiosity of a child secure in his family's love and protection. "Miss Moore," he said one crisp October morning as they worked together harvesting late pumpkins, "do you think you will stay with us always?" The question caught Sarah off guard, forcing her to confront assumptions she had been afraid to examine. "Would you like me to stay?" "Yes, ma'am. It has been like having a ma again, except different." Better in some ways because you chose to be here. The boy's perception astounded her. He understood that her presence was voluntary, that she remained with them not from obligation or lack of alternatives, but from genuine affection and commitment. The insight spoke to emotional intelligence far beyond his years. Joshua had been listening from where he repaired a fence section nearby. Daniel's right about the choosing part. Makes all the difference in the world. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace after Daniel had gone to bed, Joshua broached the subject that had been growing between them throughout the autumn months. "Sarah, I need to say something that has been on my mind." She looked up from her mending, noting the unusual formality in his tone. "Of course. These past months watching you with Daniel, seeing how you have made this place into a real home again, it has got me thinking about things I figured were finished when Rebecca died." Sarah's needle stilled in her hands as she understood where the conversation was heading. "I is not talking about replacing Rebecca," Joshua continued carefully. "A man do not replace his first love any more than a woman forgets her first heartbreak. But there is room in a heart for different kinds of love, and what I feel for you is something new." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable in ways that frontier men rarely allowed themselves to express. Sarah felt her own heart responding to his words, recognizing emotions she would been afraid to acknowledge. "Joshua, you need to understand something about my past," she said quietly. "I was not just running from an arranged marriage. My father made business deals using my engagement as collateral. If I do not marry Marcus Whitfield, other people will suffer financial ruin." How many people? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Railroad workers, farmers who borrowed against future crop prices, small businessmen who extended credit based on Pemberton guarantees. My father structured everything so that my marriage would trigger payments and contracts that keep his empire functioning. Joshua absorbed this information with the steady calm that characterized his approach to serious problems. "So your choosing freedom hurts innocent people who never had a say in the matter." "Exactly. That is why Whitfield was so confident he could force me to return. He knew I would eventually realize that my personal happiness was costing others their livelihoods. And that is why you have been looking so troubled lately, even with the community supporting us." Sarah nodded, grateful that he understood the moral complexity of her situation. "I keep thinking about those railroad workers who will not get paid if certain contracts fail, or farmers who will lose their land when loans get called in early." Joshua stood and walked to the window, staring out at the star-filled darkness that surrounded their valley. "Rebecca faced a similar choice once," he said finally. "Not exactly the same, but similar enough." "What happened?" "Her family wanted her to marry a banker's son back in Missouri. Would have solved a lot of financial problems for a lot of people. But she chose differently, chose to come west with me instead." "Did you ever regret it?" "Did she?" Joshua turned back to face her, his expression tender with memory. "Not for 1 minute. But we both understood that choices have consequences, and we would have to live with whatever came from following our hearts instead of other people's expectations." The parallel was not exact, but Sarah understood his point. Choices made from love and principle carried their own moral weight, even when they caused pain to others. "The difference is that Rebecca's choice mainly affected her own family," Sarah pointed out. "My choice affects strangers who trusted my father's word. Maybe, but it also affects Daniel, and me, and the community that has chosen to support you. Their welfare matters too." Joshua sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Tell me something. If you go back, if you marry Whitfield and save all those financial arrangements, what happens to you?" Sarah considered the question honestly. "I survive. I fulfill my obligations. I probably live comfortably in material terms. And your spirit, your happiness, your chance to choose your own path, those become secondary concerns." "That is what I thought." Joshua's voice carried quiet determination. "Rebecca taught me something about that kind of sacrifice. She said that giving up your soul to save other people's comfort is not really saving them at all. It is just teaching them that forcing good people to suffer is acceptable." The wisdom in his words struck Sarah like physical force. She would been so focused on the immediate consequences of her choice that she would fail to consider the broader moral implications. By surrendering to her father's manipulations, She would validate the system that made such manipulations possible. But the workers, the farmers, they will still suffer if I do not return. Maybe. Or maybe your father will find other ways to honor his commitments when he realizes he cannot use you as collateral anymore. Men like Harrison Pemberton do not build empires by folding the first time a plan do not work out. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching the house at speed. Joshua immediately to the window with practiced caution. 3 riders, he reported quietly, coming hard. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach as the familiar patterns of pursuit returned. She moved to wake Daniel, but Joshua stopped her with a gesture. Let us see what they want first. A voice called from the darkness. Kane, Joshua Kane. It is Frank Peterson. Got news from town. Joshua opened the door cautiously. Frank Peterson dismounted quickly, followed by Sheriff Moore and a third man Sarah did not recognize. What has happened? Joshua asked. Telegraph came through this afternoon, Frank said breathlessly. Harrison Pemberton's dead. Died 3 days ago in Chicago. Heart attack, according to the wire. Sarah felt the world shift around her as the implications sank in. Her father's death changed everything. The business arrangements, the marriage contract, the legal pressures that had been building against her chosen family. There is more, Sheriff Moore added. Federal Marshal got word to withdraw his warrant. Seems there is no legitimate charges against Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton after all. The third man stepped forward, revealing himself to be the telegraph operator. Message came through, addressed to Sarah Moore, care of Joshua Kane. Figured it was important enough to bring out tonight. He handed Sarah a folded paper with hands that trembled slightly from the cold ride. She opened it carefully, reading the brief message that would reshape her understanding of everything she would fled. It is from my father's lawyer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Pemberton's will leaves everything to me, with specific instructions that the marriage contract with Marcus Whitfield is void, and that I am free to live wherever I choose. Joshua moved closer, offering silent support as she continued reading. He says my father realized what he had done was wrong, forcing me into arrangements I never agreed to. Will includes provisions to honor all existing business commitments, without requiring my marriage or return to Chicago. Frank Peterson whistled low. So old Harrison grew a conscience at the end. Appears so, Sheriff Moore agreed, which means Miss Sarah here is now a very wealthy woman, with no legal obligations to anyone. The transformation from hunted fugitive to independent heiress should have felt like complete victory, but Sarah found herself strangely numb to the change in circumstances. The months of hiding, of building a new identity, of finding love and family in unexpected places, had altered her in ways that could not be undone by legal documents or inherited wealth. After the visitors departed with promises to spread word of the changed situation, Sarah sat in the kitchen trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Daniel had awakened during the commotion and listened with wide eyes as the adults explained that the danger had passed. So you do not have to pretend to be someone else anymore, he asked. No, I do not have to pretend anymore, but you will still be our Sarah, will not you? Not the fancy lady from the picture? The boy's question cut to the heart of Sarah's internal struggle. Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton, heiress to a railroad fortune, represented a world of possibilities and responsibilities. Sarah Moore, frontier woman and chosen family member, represented a different kind of weight altogether. I will always be your Sarah, she promised, meaning it completely. Joshua waited until Daniel had returned to bed before raising the practical questions that inheritance would create. What will you do now? You could go anywhere, do anything. Buy a mansion in San Francisco, travel to Europe, live like the wealthy lady you have always been. Sarah looked around the simple kitchen that had become the center of her world. Is that what you think I should do? I think you should do whatever makes you happy. But I would be lying if I said I would not be heartbroken to see you go. The honesty in his admission gave Sarah courage to voice her own feelings. I have been happier these past months than I ever was in my father's house. I have learned things about myself I never knew, discovered capabilities I never had chance to develop. Going back to that life would feel like dying. Then do not go back. Stay here. Marry me, help me raise Daniel, Build something together that is ours by choice rather than obligation. The proposal was simple and direct, lacking the formal ceremony or elaborate declarations that would have accompanied such a moment in her previous life. But it carried more genuine emotion than any elaborate production could have conveyed. "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss that sealed their engagement tasted of honesty and hope, of shared work and mutual respect, of love that had grown from friendship and partnership rather than mere passion or convenience. News of Harrison Pemberton's death and Sarah's changed circumstances reached Marcus Whitfield the following morning, transmitted by telegraph operators who found gossip more interesting than professional discretion. His reaction was immediate and violent, manifesting in threats against the telegraph office, demands for impossible legal remedies, and increasingly erratic behavior that alarmed even his hired supporters. Ezra Thompson distanced himself from Whitfield's cause with the speed of a man who recognized a sinking ship. "I was just facilitating legitimate business," he protested to anyone who would listen. Had no idea the man was operating under false pretenses. Whitfield's hired men proved less adaptable to changed circumstances. Accustomed to intimidating isolated individuals, they found themselves facing an entire community that had united in opposition to outside interference. Their attempts at continued pressure were met with collective resistance that made their work both dangerous and unprofitable. The final confrontation came on a cold November morning when Whitfield arrived at the Triple K with his remaining supporters, determined to salvage something from his failed schemes. He would apparently convinced himself that Sarah's inheritance somehow belonged to him by right of their broken engagement, and that force could accomplish what legal manipulation had failed to achieve. Sarah spotted the approaching riders from the kitchen window where she was preparing breakfast. "Joshua," she called quietly, "Whitfield's coming, and he has got men with him." Joshua emerged from the barn where he had been feeding the horses, Daniel at his side carrying a bucket of grain. Father and son moved with practiced coordination, Daniel disappearing into the house while Joshua positioned himself in the yard with. "That is far enough, Whitfield," Joshua called when the riders were still 50 yards away. "State your business, and move on." Whitfield rode closer despite the warning, his face twisted with rage and frustration. "My business is with Sarah Pemberton. She owes me compensation for the marriage contract her father broke." "Her father's dead, and she do not owe you nothing," Joshua replied calmly. "Turn around and leave peaceful, or face the consequences." "I am not leaving without what is rightfully mine," Whitfield snarled, signaling his men to spread out in an obvious preparation for violence. The action triggered responses that Whitfield had not anticipated. Men he had not seen emerged from positions behind trees and buildings, and the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of Sheriff Moore with a substantial posse. Frank Peterson's voice carried across the valley from his position behind a smokehouse. "You are surrounded, Whitfield. Surrender peaceful, and you might live to see trial." The community had prepared for this possibility, organizing a defensive network that transformed Whitfield's intended ambush into a trap for his own forces. The men he would hired for intimidation found themselves outmanned and outnumbered by neighbors who had decided to end the threat permanently. Whitfield's men proved smarter than their employer, raising their hands and surrendering without firing a shot. Only Whitfield himself seemed incapable of accepting defeat, despite the hopeless odds. "Do not do it, Marcus," Sarah called from the porch, stepping into view for the first time. "It is finished. My father's dead, the contracts are void, and these people will kill you if you threaten their families." For a moment, Whitfield seemed to recognize the reality of his situation. Then pride and frustration overcame reason. Joshua's response was swift and decisive. Sheriff Moore approached with professional caution, confirming what everyone already knew: justified defense of home and family. The formal pronouncement marked the end of Sarah's long flight from her past. The man who had pursued her across 3 states, who had threatened her chosen family, who had represented everything corrupt and controlling about her former life, would never trouble anyone again. As the posse rounded up Whitfield's surviving men and prepared them for transport to jail, the community members who had rallied to defend the Triple K began dispersing to their own homes and responsibilities. Their casual acceptance of what had just occurred spoke to frontier justice, frontier values. Threats to the community were met with community response, and those who brought violence received violence in return. Daniel emerged from the house where he had waited as instructed, his young face serious as he absorbed the gravity of what had transpired. "Is it really over now, Miss Sarah?" "It is really over," she confirmed, kneeling to embrace the boy who would become so precious to her. "Good," Daniel said simply. "I was getting tired of worrying about bad men." That evening, as Sarah and Joshua sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, they discussed plans for their future with the freedom that came from knowing the past could no longer threaten them. "I have been thinking about your inheritance," Joshua said carefully. "That is a lot of money and responsibility, more than a frontier rancher knows how to handle." Sarah had been considering the same issues. "I want to use it to build something good here. Better schools, maybe a hospital, things that would help the whole community grow stronger." "That would make Rebecca smile," Joshua observed. "She always said that real wealth was what you built for other people, not what you hoarded for yourself." Mention of his first wife carried no awkwardness or jealousy. Sarah had come to understand that love did not diminish when shared, and that honoring Rebecca's memory strengthened rather than threatened their own relationship. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing their valley in snow that transformed the landscape into something ethereal and beautiful. The isolation that had once seemed threatening now felt protective, wrapping their small family in peace and quiet contentment. Sarah threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm that surprised her. Having rejected the elaborate ceremony her father had planned, she found joy in creating something simple and meaningful with her chosen community. The church ladies embraced the project with delight, contributing handmade decorations, traditional foods, and the kind of warm support that made Sarah understand she would truly found her home. Daniel appointed himself official supervisor of wedding arrangements, taking his responsibilities with endearing seriousness. "Miss Sarah, do you think Ma would have liked the flowers we picked?" he asked, one snowy afternoon as they worked on decorations. "I think she would have loved them," Sarah replied honestly, "and I think she would be happy that her son helped choose them." The boy beamed with pride at being included in such important decisions. His wholehearted acceptance of their upcoming marriage had touched Sarah deeply, demonstrating the security he felt in their growing family unit. Christmas morning brought the wedding ceremony that would officially unite the Kane family. Reverend Hayes performed the service in the small church decorated with evergreen boughs and winter flowers, before a congregation that included everyone who had supported them through the difficult months of threat and uncertainty. Sarah wore a simple white dress she would sewn herself, practical but beautiful, appropriate for a frontier woman, beginning a new chapter of her life. Joshua stood beside her in his best suit, his weathered hands gentle as he placed a plain gold band on her finger. "Do you, Sarah Elizabeth, take Joshua to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Sarah said clearly, meaning the words with every fiber of her being. "Do you, Joshua Kane, take Sarah Elizabeth to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Joshua replied, his voice steady with conviction. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Joshua, you may kiss your bride." The kiss that sealed their marriage tasted of promise and possibility, of shared dreams and mutual commitment. The congregation erupted in celebration. Sarah felt complete in ways she would never imagine possible. Daniel stepped forward as the new family turned to face their community, his young voice carrying across the church with proud announcement. "Now I got Ma and a Pa again, and we are all Kanes together." The reception that followed filled Peterson's store with laughter, music, and the kind of abundant feast that frontier communities created when they wanted to celebrate properly. Sarah found herself surrounded by women who would become genuine friends, men who treated her with respect and affection, children who saw her as a natural part of their extended family. Frank Peterson raised a toast, the captured the sentiment of the entire gathering. To Joshua and Sarah Kane, who proved that love built on respect and shared work is stronger than any force that tries to tear it apart. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music provided by various community members and dancing that filled the available space with joyful movement. Sarah danced with her new husband, with Daniel, with various neighbors who wanted to wish her well, feeling lighter and happier than she would ever been in her previous life of privilege and constraint. As the evening wound down and the newlyweds prepared to return to their ranch, Sheriff Moore approached with news that would close the final chapter of Sarah's complicated past. "Got word from Chicago," he said quietly. "Pemberton's lawyers have settled all the business arrangements your father left behind. Workers got paid, contracts got honored. Nobody lost their livelihoods because of your choice to stay here." The relief that flooded through Sarah was almost overwhelming. The guilt that had shadowed her happiness, the worry about innocent people suffering from her decisions, could finally be laid to rest. "How did they manage it?" she asked. "Turns out your father had been setting aside funds for months before he died, making sure his business would not collapse if something happened to him. Lawyers said Harrison Pemberton spent his final weeks making sure you would be free to choose your own life without hurting anybody else." The revelation painted her father's last actions in a new light. Perhaps his conscience had indeed awakened, or perhaps his love for her had finally overcome his need to control her destiny. Either way, his final gift had been the freedom to build her own happiness without carrying the burden of others' suffering. Spring returned to their valley with renewed abundance, confirming that Sarah's new life had taken root in every possible way. The garden she had planted with such care the previous year had survived the winter and emerged stronger, much like her own transformation from sheltered heiress to capable frontier woman. The community projects she would funded with her inheritance began taking shape. A new schoolhouse that would serve the growing population, a medical clinic where traveling doctors could provide more regular care, improvements to the church that would accommodate expanding congregations. Each project strengthened the ties that bound her to the place and people she would chosen. Daniel thrived under the stability and love of their completed family, his education expanding to include advanced mathematics, literature, and the practical sciences that would serve him well, whether he chose to remain on the ranch or pursue opportunities in the wider world. More importantly, the wariness that had characterized his approach to adults had completely disappeared, replaced by the confident curiosity of a child, secure in his family's permanent love. "Ma," he said one evening as Sarah helped him with a particularly challenging arithmetic problem, using the title naturally and without self-consciousness, "do you think I could be a teacher someday?" "Like you are with me, I think you could be anything you want to be," Sarah replied honestly. "Teacher, rancher, doctor, lawyer, whatever calls to your heart." "What if what calls to my heart is staying here and helping Pa build the ranch bigger?" Sarah smiled at the boy's thoughtful question. "Then that would be a fine choice too. There is honor in any work that is done with love and skill." Joshua entered the kitchen as they spoke, carrying the day's final chores and the satisfied exhaustion of productive labor. "What are we discussing so seriously?" "Daniel's future," Sarah explained. "He's thinking about all the possibilities ahead of him." "Good thing to think about," Joshua agreed, settling into his chair by the fire. "But no need to decide tonight. Growing up is about discovering what kind of man you want to become, and that takes time." The conversation reflected the security that had settled over their household like a warm blanket. With threats eliminated and futures open, they could afford to contemplate possibilities, rather than merely struggle for survival. Late that night, as Sarah and Joshua lay together in the marriage bed they would shared for 6 months, they talked quietly about the dreams that inheritance and safety had made possible. "I never expected to be happy again after Rebecca died," Joshua admitted. "Figured I would just raise Daniel best I could and find whatever contentment was possible in work and duty. And now?" Sarah asked, nestling closer to his warmth. "Now I understand that the heart's got more room than I ever imagined. What I feel for you do not diminish what I felt for Rebecca. It is just different, built on different foundations, but equally real." Sarah thought about her own transformation, how the frightened girl who had fled her father's house had become a woman capable of fighting for her chosen family and building something meaningful from nothing. "I used to think love meant giving up pieces of yourself until there was nothing left," she said. "Now I know it means becoming more yourself than you ever thought possible." Years flowed like water through their valley, each season bringing changes that strengthened rather than threatened the life they would build together. Daniel grew into a young man of principle and purpose, his education enhanced by practical experience and moral guidance. The wariness that had once characterized his approach to the world gave way to confident leadership and genuine compassion for others. When he turned 16, Daniel announced his intention to pursue law, but with a focus that would have made both his mothers proud. "I want to help families like ours," he explained during one of their evening conversations. "Make sure that powerful men cannot force their will on decent people." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride at the young man's wisdom. "Your ma, Rebecca, would be so proud of the man you are becoming." "Both my mass," Daniel corrected gently, the distinction natural and unforced. The correction touched Sarah deeply, confirming that the family they would build honored the past while embracing the future. Love had indeed multiplied rather than divided, creating space for everyone who deserved a place in their hearts. Sarah's pregnancy was discovered during that same summer, bringing joy that seemed almost too abundant to contain. The coming child would complete their family in ways none of them had dared to hope, providing Daniel with a sibling and Sarah with the experience of motherhood from the very beginning. The pregnancy progressed smoothly under the careful attention of frontier women who understood both the challenges and the joys of bringing new life into a demanding world. Mrs. Peterson served as midwife, her experience and practical wisdom providing reassurance during moments of anxiety. "First babies can be unpredictable," she explained during one of Sarah's monthly examinations, "but you are strong and healthy. This little one will arrive when it is ready." Joshua's reaction to the coming child combined excitement with protective concern, his experience of losing Rebecca making him acutely aware of the risks that childbirth carried. But Sarah's strength and the community's support network provided reassurance that this birth would bring blessing rather than tragedy. Rebecca Sarah Kane arrived during a blizzard in February, her strong cries announcing her presence to a house filled with anticipation and love. She was perfect, tiny but vigorous, with dark hair like her father's, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with alert intelligence. "She is beautiful," Joshua whispered, as he held his daughter for the first time, his weathered hands impossibly gentle with the precious bundle. Daniel, now 17 and shouldering increasing responsibilities around the ranch, approached his new sister with reverent awe. "She is so small," he observed wonderfully. "Will I be able to teach her things?" "You will teach her all sorts of things," Sarah assured him from her bed, exhausted but radiant with fulfillment. "How to be brave, how to be kind, how to find joy in simple pleasures. She is lucky to have such a good big brother." The baby's arrival marked the completion of their family's transformation from survivors to thrivers. As spring returned to their valley once again, bringing with it the promise of continued growth and prosperity, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place of perfect contentment. Years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of seasons well lived. Daniel pursued his legal education with distinction, returning each summer to help with ranch work and to share his growing understanding of law and justice. His commitment to serving working families rather than wealthy interests reflected the values that had shaped his upbringing. Rebecca grew into a bright, curious child who moved easily between the traditional feminine skills her mother taught and the practical frontier abilities her father and brother demonstrated. She could sew a fine seam and birth a calf with equal competence, embodying the adaptability that frontier life demanded. The community continued to grow and prosper, guided by the principles of mutual support and collective welfare that Sarah's arrival had helped establish. The schoolhouse she would funded became a source of pride for the entire region, drawing families from neighboring counties who wanted their children to receive quality education. When Wyoming achieved statehood, Daniel was elected to represent their district in the first state legislature. His campaign built on promises to protect working families from corporate exploitation. His inaugural speech quoted both the Bible and the territorial constitution, weaving together the moral and legal frameworks that had guided his development. Justice, he declared to the assembled lawmakers, is not just about following written law. It is about making sure that law serves the people who live under it, particularly those who cannot protect themselves. Sarah watched from the gallery with tears of pride streaming down her face, understanding that the boy she would help raise had become exactly the kind of man the frontier needed: principled, compassionate, and committed to using his abilities in service of others. The railroad's completion through their valley brought the changes everyone had anticipated, but changes managed in ways that benefited established residents rather than outside speculators. Sarah's involvement in territorial politics had helped ensure that development served the community rather than exploiting it. On a warm autumn evening 25 years after her arrival at the Maybrook auction, Sarah sat on her porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard, where Daniel had once fed chickens and learned his letters. Joshua dozed in his rocking chair beside her, his hair now silver, but his presence still the anchor around which her world revolved. A letter lay open in her lap, another message from a young woman seeking advice about escaping unwanted marriage arrangements. Word of Sarah's story had spread over the years, making her an unlikely symbol of hope for those trapped by family expectations and financial obligations. "Still taking in strays," Joshua observed sleepily, having read the letter earlier. "Still trying to pay forward what was given to us," Sarah replied, already composing her response in her mind. The conversation was interrupted by Daniel's arrival with his own children, 3 young ones who called her Grandma Sarah, and filled the old house with laughter and purpose. Behind him came Rebecca, now 23, and married to the young doctor, served their expanding community. "How is the newest addition to the territory?" Sarah asked, noting the satisfied exhaustion on Rebecca's face. "Growing strong," Rebecca replied, settling her newborn son into Sarah's experienced arms. "Doc says he is the healthiest baby he has delivered this year." As the family gathered for their weekly supper, 3 generations sharing the table Joshua had built during their first winter together, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from understanding her life's purpose had been fulfilled beyond her wildest dreams. "Frank Peterson stopped by the office today," Daniel reported, as they lingered over coffee and pie. "Said to tell you that the new families arriving on tomorrow's train are looking for the same kind of welcome you got when you first came." "Then they will find it," Sarah replied simply. "The Digbiske was Nutistu. They protect people who need protection and help folks build the lives they are meant to live." Joshua reached for her hand across the table, his weathered fingers intertwining with hers and in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Funny how things work out. What looked like ending turned out to be beginning. "Not beginning," Sarah corrected gently, as she had many times over the years. "Becoming. We all became who we were meant to be." As the evening wound down and family members departed for their own homes, Sarah and Joshua settled into their familiar evening routine on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky that had sheltered their love through decades of change and growth. "Any regrets?" Joshua asked, as he had countless times before. "Only one," Sarah replied, surprising him after all these years. "What is that?" "I regret that it took me so long to understand that running away from the wrong life was the same thing as running toward the right one." The answer satisfied them both, summarizing the wisdom they would gain through decades of choosing love over convenience, principle over profit, community over individual advantage. The woman who had stood terrified on that auction block had discovered that freedom was not about escaping all obligations, but about choosing which obligations to embrace. On a golden morning 40 years after her arrival in Maybrook, Sarah Kane stood in her garden, watching great-grandchildren chase butterflies among the flowers she would planted with such hope during those early seasons of uncertainty. The mountains that had witnessed her transformation rose unchanged in the distance, their permanence a reminder that some things endured while others passed away. Joshua had died peacefully the previous winter, his hand in hers as he drew his final breath in the bed they would shared for 4 decades. His passing had left an emptiness that nothing could fill, but also a legacy of love and principle that would guide their family for generations to come. "Grandma Great," called the youngest child. using the title that had evolved naturally over the years. "Tell us again about the auction." Sarah smiled, settling into the rocking chair Joshua had made for her 50th birthday. The story had become family legend, passed down through children and grandchildren, who understood that their prosperity and security had been built on one woman's courage to choose authenticity over comfort. "Well," she began, her voice still strong despite her 83 years. "It was a spring day much like this one, and I was the most frightened I would ever been in my life." As she spoke, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction that came from understanding her story had meaning beyond her own experience. The deception that had begun in desperation had become a foundation for truth. The flight had led to home, and the gamble had resulted in a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The auction block in Maybrook had been removed years ago, replaced by a small park where children played and families gathered for community celebrations. But its memory lived on in the stories told around frontier firesides, tales of courage rewarded and love triumphant, of communities that protected their own and strangers who became family. Sarah Elizabeth Pemberton and I completely on that distant spring day, but Sarah Kane would live forever in the hearts and memories of those who understood that the greatest deception was often the one that revealed the deepest truth, that home was not a place inherited, but a life chosen. Family was not blood but commitment, and that freedom came not from escaping all bonds but from embracing the right ones. As evening approached and the mountains began to glow with sunset fire, Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of home, children's laughter, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the wind through cottonwood leaves that had witnessed every season of her transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight offered perfect peace, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well shared. The pretense that had saved her from forced marriage had led to truths more precious than any inheritance, and home had proven to be not a place on any map, but the circle of hearts that chose to beat in rhythm with her own. And choosing to become Sarah Moore at that long-ago auction, she had discovered how to become fully herself at last.